2.
So people can actually hear us.
We are on. We are live. It is so wonderful to be here this evening. Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Gifted Education Policy Symposium and Conference, hosted by the Office of the Daniel L. Ritchie Endowed Chair in Gifted Education at the Morgridge College of Education at the University of Denver. We are so pleased to welcome you this evening. The vision for the work embodied by the Endowed Chair includes a future in which giftedness will be understood, embraced, and systematically nurtured throughout the nation and the world. I am Norma Haffenstein, the Daniel L. Ritchie Endowed Chair in Gifted Education, and it is indeed my pleasure to extend warmest greetings and welcome to this special evening. Tonight, our time together is designed for all of you, teacher leaders, building and district leaders, researchers, parents, mental health professionals, and educational service providers. And our conference this year, held in February, Black History Month, is focused on addressing disproportionality in gifted education. We are pleased to serve as host to leading educators and researchers, joining with all of us to explore gifted education from multiple perspectives and to urge each of us to become stronger advocates, taking that next step to support all gifted learners. Our conference and this special award is made possible by the generosity of many. First, thank you to the Considine Family Foundation for their ongoing support and generosity and deep dedication to gifted learners. Thank you to our Emerald sponsors, the Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented, Gifted Unlimited, Gifted Unlimited's Talent Search, the Center for Gifted Studies at Western Kentucky University, and the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children, and to our Ruby sponsors, the Colorado Academy for Educators of the Gifted, Talented, and Creative, JAH Consulting, the National Association for Gifted Children, Rick Center for Gifted Children, Sierra Gifted Educational Services, and the G-Word Film. Thank you to Morgridge College of Education Dean, Dr. Karen Riley, and Teaching and Learning Sciences Department Chair, Dr. Rashida Banerjee. And again, I'd like to extend a special thank you to Joy Lynn for her tireless work and expertise in coordination of this event, and to our alumni and graduate students who are serving as room hosts and technical support. We are truly grateful. In collaboration with the Considine family, the Palmarium Award was established to recognize an individual who exemplifies the vision of a future in which giftedness will be understood, embraced, and systematically nurtured throughout the nation and the world. Recipients of the Palmarium Award demonstrate the vision through understanding of giftedness in the areas of practice by impacting graduate education, pre-service, and the P-12 community, community outreach through advocacy at a variety of levels, local, national, and international, publications informing teachers, children, parents, policymakers, and academia, and research, influencing theory, practice, and policy. And it is through the generosity of the Considine Family Foundation that the Palmarium Award provides professional acknowledgement and tangible support to eminent leaders in the field of gifted education. Our past recipients are Dr. Tracy Cross, who joins us this evening, Dr. Frank Worrell, Dr. Marcia Gentry, who you'll see again, I think, Dr. James Webb in memoriam, Dr. Del Siegley, Dr. Julia Link Roberts, who's been with us as well during this conference and symposium, and Dr. Sylvia Rim. So it is indeed my great pleasure that I announce the 2021 Palmarium Award recipient, Dr. Gilman Whiting. I would like to share with you some of the content of Dr. Whiting's nomination letters. This leader wrote, "As a previous winner and participant in your conference, I am familiar with the great work of your program and with this award. In reviewing the criteria for the award, I believe that Dr. Whiting embodies all of the criteria and more, because in addition to being a well-respected scholar, his outreach work within the community is second to none and has had a great impact on the lives of hundreds of students that he touches." From a community leader, "To say the needs of children and families that we serve are great would be an understatement. However, we are blessed, as some of our greatest impact with these children and their families has taken place in the past 4 years with our meeting and collaborating with Dr. Gilman Whiting, Vanderbilt University, and his Scholar Identity Model and Institute. And many scholars have theories and models, but few implement this work to make a difference in the actual lives of students and to contribute their talent to development and success. And with more than 60 scholarly works and dozens of presentations across the country and around the world, Dr. Whiting is a well-known and well-respected scholar who exemplifies the purpose of this award. I urge you to recognize his obvious and consistent excellence in working with and for students." Compelling nomination letters. Dr. Whiting challenges our thinking and urges us to improve our practice with a commitment to equity and opportunity. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Gilman Whiting as he shares his presentation, Reframing Giftedness, the Hopes of Gifted Education. Congratulations, Dr. Whiting.
So first, should I share the award? Should I share the award that you?
Sure, we'd
Sure,
love to see it.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's right here. I had such a beautiful wrapping on it. I want everybody to see it came beautifully wrapped. And it said Tiffany and Company on it. So I said it must come to the wrong place because I get all my stuff at TJ Maxx. And so here it is. It's a beautiful plate. And on it has the my name on there and Palmerian Award, Education, Gift Education Visionary, University of Denver. So thank you very much, Dr. Happenstein.
Our pleasure.
So I'm going to start my clock now. I'm going to start off with a little memorial. The only history that matters is the history that we know. My daughter, my wonderful daughter, often says to me, "Dad, just give me the short version, the moral of the story, up front, if you will." But I don't want to give her the convenient crib note version, but instead teach her a lesson in hopes of making her life a little better, a little safer, more fulfilled, more enjoyable, even if it's not happening at that moment. This is what we should do as guardians and as adults, as educators. We teach the ones we love from the best and scariest parts of our memories and our knowledge. My research is historically based as well. Data, points, and sets match almost perfectly the past longitudinal studies, but are glimpses into the past. We use them in a way to predict trends that, like teaching my daughter, could provide lessons to the future. We are afraid of not knowing. At the same time, we conveniently forget or ignore history. In 1999, descendants of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people and local politicians began an annual Sands Creek spiritual healing run. It's a 173-mile commemorative run. It represents the routes used by soldiers when returning to Denver. You see, in 1864, the year that University of Denver was founded, US soldiers of the 3rd Regiment Volunteer Cavalry in Colorado, after massacring over 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho women and children at Sand Creek, took this route back to Denver as they sported their trophies from their slaughter as they paraded through downtown Denver on December 22nd, just a week and a half before the Emancipation Proclamation. Malcolm X says, "A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything." I want to thank you all for logging in tonight. I hope that you and your families and friends and colleagues are all doing well. If you find what I say or how I think of interest, or have comments, questions, or ideas, and want to connect, you can find me on all forms of social media. But as always, the best connect by email. In my lower third, that area down the bottom here, you'll see information with my email and the rest of my information all night. These are unprecedented times, and I want to give you all more than just a talking head on Zoom. We've gotten used to that, and I'm trying to do some things that can excite my students. But technology tonight, and hopefully will enhance our interaction, much of which has only been used by me for a couple of times. So apologies up front for future glitches that might happen tonight. I also learned that from history. To Dr. Heffenstein and her trusted great graduate assistant, Joy Lynn, and the Palmarian Selection Committee, thank you. The symposium has been outstanding. I took part in the opening parents, was awesome, as well as the follow-up program. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. As you know, when you called, I was quite awestruck and surprised and honored to be selected as a 2021 Palmerian Award recipient. There are brilliant and wonderful scholars and gifted practitioners amongst us here tonight and out in the field who have paved the way for me to be here. I literally could spend the whole night thanking people who have shared time, wisdom, and motivation and guidance with me, but then we never get to the crux of my message tonight. So I'd like to recognize very quickly a couple of people because I think they have led me to where I am today. I'll recognize just a few. So Roger Harris, Dr. Roger Harris, I call him Grandmaster. He's been my friend and mentor and colleague for more than 40 years. Track and field coach in Boston, as well as football coach, and now a mentor to me. Joe Bethany, who's a swim coach, also over 40 years I've known this man, and he actually taught me more about African-American history than I knew, and he was from Lebanon back in the 70s when I used to swim in Boston. And then I also want to make a tribute to my stepfather, Robert Walden. We call him Walt Dooney. He just passed just last week of cancer after a long bout with cancer. And he was a great person. So I just wanted to share this with us tonight as part of this award ceremony. On the good side, I have a newest great nephew, Stone Anthony Haywood, just 5 days old. So I guess that's how we replace ourselves. We put a little love into the world and we take a little love away from the world. I want to recognize a couple of folks who, without them, I don't think this would be possible in some kind of ways. My friend and colleague, Marsha Gentry, professor at Purdue University, who herself is a former recipient, as I earlier mentioned. She works tirelessly with dozens of graduate students from around the world, and I feel like they're part of my family as well. And she directs the outstanding summer program, Jerry, the Gifted Education Resource and Research Institute Camp. I pray for her every day as she battles with health issues. She's snowed in up in the upper UP right now playing with her dog Juby, who I'm sure is just jumping around acting a complete fool. Hey, Marcia. Anyway, I also like to say hello to another colleague of mine, former Vanderbilt University professor, now a professor at The Ohio State University, whose tenacity for desegregated gifted education drew me closer to this field many years ago. She was my right hand at Vanderbilt in the early days of my work, and I will always thank her for her authentic intellectual abilities and tenacity. She is a recognized prolific author and a national leader in the field of gift education. She too has my prayers as she battles with health issues. And not last but not least in this category are Joe and Sally. Joe Renzulli and Sally Reese, professors at UConn, who over the years have encouraged me. They're great folks there at UConn. Not only have they produced scholars like the late, great Dr. Alexandria Baldwin, I believe she was Professor Renzulli's first graduate student, and Marcia Gentry, but also provide opportunities for thousands of teachers, administrators, and program coordinators through their Summer Conference, which is a conference, fraternity, and institute. Now in its 43rd year, I think we're going to go virtual this year. And they demonstrate what can have impact on the lives of students, teachers, families, for a very, very long time. But we must also keep in mind, no matter how uncomfortable we are, that we plan for diversity and equity in all that we do. There are a couple other people that I want to recognize here tonight. And the first one is Dr. Wallace Mclaughlin. He's the president and CEO of Fathers and Families Resource and Research Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. He is an unrelenting advocate for children and families for nearly 30 years. The Fathers Family Research Center is one of the most successful nonprofit agencies in the country that focuses primarily on fathers. The program allowed me to do my doctoral research while a student at Purdue University in West Lafayette and hone what would become my body of work. In the lower third, I'll put something up here in the lower third later on and tell you about it. But in the lower third, I want to be able to, let me see here. That's one of my overlays I told you about that might happen, but it's okay. In the lower third, you'll see there'll be some addresses down there for you to take a look at. And I want you to think about this if you decide to take part or become a piece of this legacy. If you'd like to support, that's where you can do that. The next picture I want to bring up is of a good friend of mine who again, without him, I don't think the work that we do here in Nashville, I could have done by myself. He's Darryl Caldwell. He's the CEO of Why We Can't Wait. It's a major reason why I proudly accept this honor, because it's not only for me, but for hundreds of children and families that we served this year, particularly during this past COVID-19 school year in summer, where we met with kids 5 or 6 days a week from the morning to the afternoon. We did math, science, engineering. We did flow drones, as well as did Zumba in the backyard and yoga. So it was a great, great time. I also want to recognize in this category, I also want to recognize some folks who are scholars up in the great state of Minnesota. Primarily a principal there, Miss Lillian DeRung, who's a primary school principal who found her way into my work. The work she is undertaking is bold and leading a program for gifted children for 26 schools in the school district. This work is needed, and the coalitions and the relationships she's building are possibly dangerous, because at these times you never know who is going to push back against us leaning forward. So as part of the Good Trouble Principles Coalition up there in the greater Minneapolis, Minnesota area, where George Floyd was murdered, more than 160 principals took the pledge to decenter whiteness and commit to making equity not an afterthought, but central to all that they do.
The cities to the suburbs, a group of Twin Cities area principals vow to make educational practices in the state more equitable. Inspired by the late Congressman John Lewis, the group calls itself the Good Trouble Coalition.
More than 150 principals representing schools stretching from the cities to the suburbs unite.
I think people are tired. I think people are fed up.
These administrators now taking a stand for educational justice.
Right now, our kids don't experience that fairness. Right now, it is unfair, and we're going to change that.
Inspired by late Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis, the group, calling itself the Good Trouble Coalition.
We have to create a coalition of principals that is really ready to do this work, do good trouble, and really break down these barriers that continue to be put in front of our Black, Brown, and Indigenous kids.
Working to dismantle what they call racist policies in the educational system. Their first course of action, fighting bias and standardized testing.
It's no shocker when you study history of our country in education that our Native children and our African American children still continue to emerge as the lowest performers.
Working to make a difference, Minneapolis North High Principal Mari Friesleben is leading the way.
And that's what this group has done for me. It's just reminded me that there's way more believers like me. I'm not the only one, and they're not the only ones. And it feels really, really good.
Friesleben says the goal is to create an environment that matches the unique identities of all students. The group originally started on Facebook, where it has more than 250 members.
History will record the tragedies of this period, and our children and our children's children will ask, where did we stand? Where will you tell them you stood during this time? I, for one, am proud to see these educators making a stand when it's uncomfortable to do so. It's not only good trouble and necessary trouble, as the late, great Congressman John Lewis said, but it's righteous and it's morally responsible. But not only are the teachers making a stand, and I just thought this was fantastic when I came across it, but the governor actually in the state, just 1 week ago today, Tim Walz detailed a plan for $745 million in new state spending on education, from childcare through non-traditional college. The long list of initiatives address pandemic-related learning in the summer, retaining unemployed adults, and boost on ongoing schools, but especially those with low property tax bases. I thought that was very interesting. I would like to have seen more money in the lowest amount category, the one that's outlined more. But Minnesota leaders like the governor there, as well as the ones I saw here on the symposium here in the first night, dealing with the GT leaders of color and allies in Colorado. They're affecting real change. And I think that's something that we need to recognize. And it tells us that a lot of our systems start at the grassroots. It becomes people who have to live through that every day, making a change. I also want to recognize a group that I've been involved with for the last 4 or 5 years. I've known a lot of people for a lot longer, but we call ourselves I Urge, and it's the Consortium for the Inclusion of Underrepresented Racial Groups in Gifted Education. The Dirty Dozen, if you will, or the Baker's Dozen, 13 of us. And if we stack our years of interest in reading and literature and our time in the field, you're close to 400 years here. You see Ken Dixon there on the upper left-hand corner who just said hello. So, hey, Ken, there you go. But we have to understand that we are still in this weird time. We all just witnessed less than a month ago. Tomorrow will be 1 month, if you can believe it. It's only been 30 days where the nation watched as we saw people going into the US Capitol. Pro-Trump supporters, yes, but this is the fabric of society. This is people, he's just letting out what people feel. The city of DC was placed on lockdown and curfew. This is both a contemporary issue and also a historical event. There are no conversations at the moment for the possible implications for the field of gifted education. So tonight, I plan to reframe our conversation while looking at some of these things. It's amazing to see that in all of history, the Confederate flag has never made its way into the hallowed grounds of the Capitol, but here we see it in the Capitol. We can't imagine somebody putting their feet up on the Speaker Pelosi's desk, but yet here we are. So the title of the conversation tonight is actually Reframing Gifted Education and Hopes of Gifted, Reframing Giftedness and Hopes of Gifted Education. My title is my talk. But before I continue, I'd like to take on the role of what we call a griot. Think about the word riot and put a G in front of it. griotherapist, if you will. It's sort of a historian, a storyteller, praise singer, poet, or musician. A griot is a repository of the oral tradition that is often seen as a leader due to their position as an advisor to royal personages. So storytelling is the way most history from ancient Akibalan, also known by Europeans as Africa, transferred information from children to their descendants and on. Also happened with the Native American culture as well. So reframing giftedness. What do I mean by reframing? Well, in psychotherapy, reframing is a technique used in therapy to create a different way of looking at a situation, a person, or relationship by changing its meaning, also referred to as cognitive reframing. I'm going to throw up a little reference for you here. So if you want to look up some of the work on it, you can do that. So cognitive reframing, it's a strategies therapists often use to help clients look at situations from a slightly different perspective. The essential idea behind reframing is that a person's point of view depends on the frame which it's viewed in. When the frame is shifted, the meaning changes and thinking and behavior of them change along with it. My research and scholarship on the Whiting Scholar Identity Model, along with race, culture, and social emotional development, which developed over the past 25 years, demonstrates that we as adults and educational leaders can change the frame for children and young adults, but we must both need and want them to do better. For example, I think about coaches. I start off with giving shout outs to my coaches. They do it with athletes all the time, from ballet to gymnastics to martial arts to football to soccer to piano every day. Elite colleges and universities, local colleges and universities can locate, recruit, retain, and graduate many of whom strictly academic programs seem to miss. They can't find. Why? Framing. So who is gifted education in America missing? I was caught off guard when my Jenkins Scholar, 2018 Youth Poet Laureate, Nashville Youth Poet Laureate, 2019 Southeast Regional Poet Laureate, now US Poet Laureate Ambassador, National Gold Key in French, published author. When she was just first or second grade, she asked me, "Dad, are boys better at math than girls?" I thought about that for a second. I believed that her private school education would somehow shield her from this. As a lifelong public school student myself, I drank the Kool-Aid that the public schools, at least here in Nashville, would be deleterious to her success. That because I was there twice daily, from pre-K to the last day of high school, picking her up and taking her to, I could derail the racist, sexist, low academic expectations, constantly providing social deficit frames that she would face. She is my research project, to build against the odds a scholar identity. What I learned was that I could change hers daily by way of positive reinforcement. We help to empower her. We constantly reinforcing her frame. She is my model of scholar identity. There is no struggle. If there is no struggle, there's no progress. 1857, Frederick Douglass said this. Framing, I believe, also has an element of timing. Like a farmer who no more throws seeds onto unprepared soil, changing the framing of gifted education is also about timing. In 2020, I believe the frame of race and racism has taken another quantum leap. Epidemics have always reflected society. As with Hurricane Katrina, what has been revealed is a highly unequal society and world. With the syndemic of COVID-19, world economic downturn, all while at the same time, Oxfam just reported a couple of days ago that the world's 10 richest people became wealthier by $540 billion during the same time period. The protests to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, two of which were caught on video and became so common, children and adults began playing games. I went to Google and Googled the name George Floyd, and what happened was I got hits, 187 million. That's 6 zeros in 0.84 seconds. I came up with pictures like these. Now we can say, well, they're guys and they're drinking and it's a Saturday and and give them whatever kind of cover we want to give them. But we also saw this. We also saw these kind of things. Now, we don't know whether or not this is, there's no video evidence, but the police allegedly was acting out this case. And not only that, when we see it, we also know that there were kids who were having what they call George Floyd challenges around the country, taking videos and posting of themselves in the position in which George Floyd was killed. One school superintendent had this to say: last week, administration became aware of a video in which youth from Osage Public Schools and others imitated the scene of the death of George Floyd. As we became aware of the video, we initiated an investigation. We are appalled by this video and have been intervening to address it. As educators, we recognize our important role in addressing this matter. When we think about these things, we really need to understand that where we are in a place that is scary. People already are tired of hearing about tired of seeing and hearing or being reminded about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or have forgotten or didn't even know about Ahmaud Arbery. Also tired of hearing about what happened at the Capitol. It's like we live, instead of the United States of America, we live in the United States of amnesia. These are the cases we know about. I want to pull from a book that just came out. Good friend of mine, a colleague who we've known for the last 30 some odd years, new professor here at Vanderbilt University, and he just has a new book out. And I just want to share just a couple of words from it. He's a New York Times best-selling author. The book is Michael Eric Dyson's Long Time Coming: Reckoning with Race in America. Dear Elijah McCain, I write to you out of profound grief. It is not easy to watch Black bodies pile up in the streets in our imaginations as we reckon with the racial catastrophe that has haunted this nation from its first breath. When I saw the video of your fatal encounter with the police, it literally made me, a grown Black man from the tough streets of Detroit, teeming with mayhem and murders, weep almost uncontrollably. I suppose it was your sweet demeanor. I suppose it was your palpable innocence. I suppose it was the fact that the video was ever posted. It told me from the start that the outcome wasn't going to be good, that you wouldn't survive, that your death would be another death that would happen as if it hadn't happened at all. Powerful, sends chills just to think about it. Those who make peaceful revolutions impossible make violent revolutions inevitable. John F. Kennedy. We encourage nonviolent direct action and not the creators of tension. We may only bring to the surface the hidden tensions that are already alive. Dr. Martin Luther King. The second part of the title says hopes of gifted education. Hopes, if you think about it, refers to what? It refers to the future. In my scholar identity model, I call this construct future orientation. However, everyone from Confucius to US presidents, Nobel Peace Prize winners to both Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi have all echoed what Edmund Burke said. Those who don't learn from history or don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. Therefore, to even contemplate hopes or future of gifted education, we must look back to acknowledge this nation and how this field developed. For most students, one of the histories that's most boring is subject. I don't say that, research says that. History is full of living, breathing, full of mysteries, good and evil, saints and sinners. It's full of colorful characters and horrific events. But the question I, like so many Black, brown students, ask is, what's it got to do with me? What role do I play in this? Socrates once said, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. So tonight, as your griot therapist, that's my wish, to make you think. I don't know if you see the elephant in the room back there, but it's the elephant in the room here. And it's not about you as it is about serving and making all education, particularly gifted education, more equitable now. This is why we can't wait. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. also said that we are not makers of history, we're made by history. For many kids like me who grew up learning that our existence began in the bowels of a slave or ship, began with no foundation, no land, no meaningful past, or as savages with no souls and remembered through hideous sports mascots, or viewed as dangerous, unintelligent thugs. Is that because doing us that way, thinking of us as intelligent, is threatening? Marcus Garvey said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, or culture is like a tree without roots. So then, what are the roots of gifted education? Where do they come from? We'd have to take a look at one of the issues I like to talk about. This is going to begin with a couple of folks and move quickly. In 1905, French psychologists Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon developed a series of tests designed to assess mental abilities rather than focus on learned information such as science, math, and reading. Binet instead concentrated on other mental abilities such as attention and memory. The scale became known as the Binet-Simon scale or Binet-Simon scale, intelligence scale. But let me pause here for a second, because at this same place and during the same time, Stanford University would have their first president. His name was David Starr Jordan. He was also a notable eugenicist who actually, right now as we speak, they're taking names off of buildings and renaming squares because of his role in the eugenics movement. One of his hires he had during that time was a person by the name of Lewis Terman, who we'll get to know a little bit better tonight as it relates to gifted education. So 11 years later, the scale was revised by Stanford psychologist Lewis Terman. He was born here, a funny thing, he was born here in Johnson County, Tennessee, to the east of here. And he was born in 1877, which is the last year of the failed Reconstruction of the South. Ironic. He would go on to rebrand the Simon Binet scale as the Stanford Binet. While Binet's original intent was to use the test to identify children who needed additional academic assistance, Terman's test soon became the means to identify those deemed feeble-minded by the eugenics movement. Just doing a time check. By the eugenics movement. During the height of the eugenics movement in the United States, tens of thousands were involuntarily sterilized. And no less than 1 in 4 or a quarter of Native American women suffered at the lunacy of this movement. Eugenics, for those who don't know, is a belief that human population can generally be improved by controlling who's allowed to have children and who's not allowed to have children. By doing this, eugenicists believed they could produce a more desirable inherited characteristics. And yes, there was a race component to it as well, as we'll hear in the writings from Lewis Terman. Shortly, in the 1930s, this now American movement, as eugenics became, J.W. Kellogg cereal was one of the biggest eugenicists you find out there, was studied and used and became the foundation, did eugenics, of the German Holocaust during World War II. But back to the Binet scale. This shift in how the test was used is notable since Binet himself believed that the intelligent test he had designed had limitations. He believed that intelligence was too complex and could not be fully captured by a single quantitative measure. He believed qualitative measures would give more of a complete understanding. Perhaps most importantly, as a mixed methodologist myself, Binet felt that such measures of intelligence were not always generalizable and could only be applied to children with similar backgrounds and experiences. Binet, like Dweck and others today, myself, believed that intelligence was not fixed or crystallized, but fluid and could be nurtured by better understanding of other areas. For example, executive functioning and other areas like that. An article from Newsweek Ed Week last year. Question, is one born gifted or are gifted behaviors developed? In this Ed Week piece from 2019 entitled, What We're Getting Wrong About Gifted Education, we're leaving out a large swath of students with high potential. This is by Dr. Joe Renzulli. In this, he discusses two competing types of assessment to best identify students for special programs and services. Assessment of learning, which in essence looks at the present. In its best form, it will take in to account students' families' backgrounds, neighborhood demographics, early life experiences, and quality of his or her school experiences. The assessment for learning takes into account the characteristics of the learner that provides the best direction for special opportunities, resources, and encouragement. These characteristics include things like curiosity, interest, learning styles, expression styles, enjoyment, and high engagement learning in particular topics. This thinking shows that no matter how gifted someone is, they need to take their talent and sharpen it like they would a tool. That is the only way to become truly powerful. Historical gifted education meant primarily European American or white Anglo-Saxon Protestant boys and men. When we consider who's smart and who's not, we have to think about what the father of gifted education, in this case, Lewis Terman, thought about in terms of who was smart and who was not with regards to education. So I'm going to bring up a few slides here, and we're going to take a look at the thinking of Lewis Terman during the time. So let's a little bit about him for those who don't know. His career highlights: Stanford University professor, past president of the American Psychological Association, father of the Stanford Binet, Terman Termites, one of the longest running gifted studies still going on today. And in 2002 was ranked 72nd as the most cited psychologist of this 20th century. This is what he was thinking at the same time. A low level of intelligence is very, very common in Spanish, Indian, and Mexican families of the Southwest and also amongst Negroes. Their dullness seems to be racial, or at least inherited from the family stocks from which they come. The whole question of racial difference in mental traits will have to be taken up anew by experimental methods. The writer predicts that when this is done, there will be discovered enormous significant racial differences in general intelligence, differences which cannot be wiped away by any scheme or mental culture. He would go on to add to this and say, children of these groups should be segregated into special classes. They cannot master abstractions, but they can often be made efficient workers. There is no possibility at present in convincing society that they should not be allowed to produce, although from a eugenic point of view, they constitute a grave problem because of their prolific breeding. So when we think about Terman and we think about some of the things that happened, we have to think also about the things that were happening in that year. Just 20. I want to have some happy things that happened during that year too. So let's look at some things that happened during that same year. Well, in 1921, Einstein releases his new theory of relativity. Jack Dempsey has the first $1 million boxing match. Babe Ruth sets 2 home run records, and the second woman elected to Congress, Alice Mary Robinson. The first one was in 1917, Jeanette Rankin. The infamous Black Sox trial, the one with all the gambling, went in. It came out a not guilty verdict, and the next day, all of them were banned for life. Also, Adolf Hitler becomes the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. J. Edgar Hoover becomes the AD of the FBI, and Donald Trump inaugurates the first Miss America was crowned in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Women were in their first year having the right to vote. Great things happening, but in that same year, there was something else that was going on. In that same year, we had just 33 days after Oklahoma entered into statehood, it passed its first law. Its first law was that Jim Crow was now the law of the land, which enforced legal segregation, blacks and whites to live separately. A traveler, businessman, wealthy, O.W. Gurley, African-American, moved to the area from Arkansas. He was born the son of enslaved parents in Alabama, now a well-to-do businessman with the drive for success. In 1906, he purchased 40 acres of land, which were only to be sold to coloreds. And he made sure that he only sold that to other African Americans. It was called Greenwood. Greenwood, also known as the Black Wall Street. Greenwood during its time provided an opportunity for those migrating from the harsh oppression of Mississippi. Once established, the average income of Black families in the area exceeded what the minimum wage is today. As a result of segregation, a dollar circulated 36 to 100 times and remained in Greenwood almost a year before leaving. Wealth was definitely being created in Greenwood. Even more impressive at that time, the state of Oklahoma had only 2 airports in it. And of the 2 airports, 6 Black families owned their own airplanes. Creation was wealth in a community known as Black Wall Street was intentional. We started this off talking about a massacre. Massacre, riots, and protests all mean different things. The term race riot does not accurately describe what happens to Greenwood. The devastation of Black Wall Street and Greenwood. The term itself implies that Blacks and whites might be equally to blame for the lawlessness and violence. The reason to act out lawlessness and violence was sparked by a poor reporting by a newspaper who would report that a young African-American boy attempted to sexually assault a white woman in an elevator. The whites refused to listen to what happened and wanted to take the young man out and arrest and hang him. But police and government intervened, and they went to the jail. When they couldn't get him out, gunshots were fired, which led and sparked a 2-day unprecedented racial violence. During the next 18 hours, or the night and the day of the riot, deputized whites killed more than 300 African Americans. They looted and burned to the ground 40 blocks of the 1,265 African American homes, including hospitals, schools, churches, and destroyed 150 businesses. Airplanes were used to drop firebombs on businesses and homes. White deputies and members of the National Guard detained 6,000 Black people and interred them into local camps. The aftermath of Greenwood was devastating. 9,000 African Americans were left homeless and lived in tents well into the winter of 1921. The historical record documents sustained murderous assaults on Black lives and property. This assault was met by brave but unsuccessful armed defenses of their community by some Black World War I veterans and others. The defense of white female virtue was the express motivation for the collective racial violence. So this modern, majestic, sophisticated, and unapologetically Black community boasted a number of banks, hotels, cafes, clothiers, movie theaters, and contemporary homes, not to mention luxuries for the first time, such as indoor plumbing and a remarkable school system that superiorly educated Black kids. Undoubtedly, less fortunate white neighbors resented the upper class lifestyle as a result of the jealous desire to put progressive, intelligent, high-achieving African Americans in their place. A wave of domestic white terrorism caused Black dispossession. Over the past 100 years, there have been hundreds of other examples. The Atlanta Massacre in 1906, Springfield riots in 1908, Detroit riots in 1943, and the Red Summer of 1919. From Anniston to Watley, Alabama to Chicago, there were between 20 and 50 cities on fire in that one year. All of these tragedies have in common is anger, resentment, after Black men returning for fighting for America. It happened at the end of the Civil War, World War I, World War II. It happened after the first African-American heavyweight boxing champion, Jack Johnson's victory in 1908. Integration in Little Rock, Arkansas, and busing in Boston. It didn't matter where it was. Wherever there were people who wanted to have progress, they met with deleterious effects and people who wanted to stop them from having the right to have equal citizenship. And that was that. So what can we learn from history? What attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors need to be changed to address the hopes for the future of gifted education? We must serve as guideposts for what is just and humane. That is our mission. That's our task these days. Instead of enacting racist, inequitable political policies and the rule of law to make it happen, we say things like, I've heard this week, it won't happen all at once. It'll take some time to get the gifted and talented education more equitable. I even heard someone say, it'll never happen. So instead, gifted education is under siege. We would rather throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater rather than mandate equitable policies and procedures backed by all the resources needed. But in this case, only Black, brown, Native, and poor babies would suffer the fall. In the long run, those with financial means will make sure their babies are safe. We know that. So in education, where have we seen some progress? It's not all bad. We saw some progress. Let's take a look at something real quickly here. If we look at this chart just really quickly, I want to look at where the gap closes the most, right there in the center. This is a NAEP data, and we're looking at 13-year-old Black-white reading average scores. And we see somewhere around the late 80s, we see that score and that gap become the least over this longitudinal study from 1970s to 2012, I believe it is. And so when we look at that, we say, okay, what is there a reason for that? We don't know. But then we look at another score here, and now we're looking at the 17-year-old Black-white mathematics scores. And again, in the late 80s, early 90s, we see that same trend happening again. What is it? And then we look at this chart, and we see a drastic chart here, trends in NAEP, again, reading scores, averaging. And again, around that 1988 timeframe, we see, again, that bulge. What is that? So what is happening here, if you don't know, busing is happening. Forced busing is happening, or the end of busing is happening. You see, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, also coinciding with the founding of the NAGC, is when we should have started busing. But busing doesn't start until 1971, 72. So when it's mandated. I was actually came to Boston and went through the busing after the first 3 or 4 years I came there. I've had bricks thrown at my bus. So I understand the fear of the integration of schools. I lived through some of those things. But what happens in the 1980s is that people say, okay, we've done that enough. We've had enough of that. We don't need to do any more of that. So then what happens is now we have a period of time when now there's nobody watching the store. As Jonathan Kozol writes in his book, the Not Savage Inequalities, but Apartheid Schooling in America, he writes that in 2005, 2006, that schools have become as segregated as they were in 1954 as they are today. Less than 1% of difference. And then we take a look at some of the school data and we can see some of the things. Now, if we look here, we can see the average white student attends a school which 9% of the students are Black, while the average Black student attends a school in which 48% of the students are Black. So when we start talking about segregated schools, we can see this in what's happening. Dog whistle politics. These are some of the things that are happening in our country as we speak. So when we start talking about doing things for the education of our students, for addressing all the inequities that are there, we have to consider what we're doing with public schooling and how we're creating secondary schools, how even in public schools, we are actually looking at things like private schools with public dollars. Who controls the past controls the future. This is what George Orwell said in 1984. Who controls the present controls the past. So who controls the idea of what we should spend our time on? You can topple every Confederate monument tomorrow, and it's not going to raise the graduation rate. Black and brown infant mortality rate produce people of color. It's not going to change water in Flint. It's not going to change the asbestos in older homes. It's not going to change all the lead poisoning in the inner cities in Chicago and in New York City. It's not going to do any of those things. As a former military officer, I can tell you, we had a lot of terms and abbreviations and acronyms for everything, like terms like Roger, Wilco, Foxtrot, Charlie Foxtrot, snafu. I always remember one, a shot across the bow, a warning. That's where we are now. So again, it's the nation come together to defeat this kind of alien. We have to think about that. So in closing, because I've got 3 minutes left, first off, this weekend is a super spreader. Wear a damn mask. That's the first thing. Wear a mask. The nation that we live in is already more than half of people of color, half white country. If we remain as profoundly unequal in the future as we are today, we're not going to survive as a country. Bottom line, if you can't maintain a healthy economy or school system if half the population is twice as likely to be unemployed, 3 times as likely to be poor, 1/20th the net worth, 2 to 3 times the rate of infant mortality, 9 years left life expectancy. COVID-19 is hitting 30 to 40% harder in the African-American community. A nation can't exist like this. It's now or never. You got to have this solidarity or we don't survive. The equity or destruction, those are our choices. I want to share one thing in the last couple of minutes. A report done by myself, Professor Marsha Gentry, also with Ann Gray, Yukiko Maeda, as well as Nilson Pereira. You can get this online. It's free to just go down and download it. It gives you information on your state in terms of missingness. I mentioned that earlier. How many kids were missing? We recorded that we're missing over 3 million kids out of gifted education. I'm talking about cities, towns, rural, all over the place. So go there, download this. Somebody can put it in the link if you want, and that'll give you a chance to talk to your folks about it. Dr. Gentry and I did a presentation at NAGC last year, and I believe just yesterday we got a call to do something this year with NAGC. But download this information. My information is right down there in the bottom. Find me on social media platforms. I want to give a shout out to a couple of my good friends up in Minnesota, Jackie Brickman and Nancy Burns. We're talking about starting a podcast. It's going to be called The Catalyst for Change. And what we're looking at is dealing with kids, adults, administrators, teachers, and all those folks who came through the system and their understanding of equity as they see it in their lives. So with that, I want to say I'm very honored, Dr. Hafenstein, for the committee to select for this award. Those who tuned in tonight, please take time to grab this book, if you will. Contact me and let's talk about these things. I don't think one time is enough. I think we have to do this thing consistently and often. It doesn't change until you're as ticked off about it as I am. So with that, I want to say thank you all very much and have a great night.